And you're trying to give the young people something that will help them. Yet you don't know exactly what it ought to be.
Thanks again for tuning into the Teach Thought podcast. My name is Drew Perkins. I'm the Director of Teach Thought Professional Development and your host. With this publishing on August 1st, 2023, I'm sure some of you are gearing up for a school year, and hopefully you've had a chance to rest and recharge, and we wish you the best on a successful school year. We've got some interesting guests coming up, including Rick Hess, who's with the American Enterprise Institute and has an interesting new book about rethinking school. Angel Eduardo and Julian Adorni, who co-published a piece in Quillette Online magazine about civility, which is near and dear to our heart, and a project that we're working on called Thought Stretchers, as well as a conversation with two authors who were close to the work of Mr. Rogers, and their book is about thinking and learning and wondering and the ways in which Mr. Rogers approached those kinds of things. As always, I encourage you to go to wegrowteachers.com if you're interested in our professional development services, which are all through the lens of inquiry. Project-based learning and differentiated instruction are the two main areas in which we work, but we also do a lot of inquiry workshops and work with leaders, and certainly have some other areas in which our workshops can help your school grow to better prepare students for the modern world. If you want to reach out to me, my email address is drew@teachthought.com, and please feel free to pass on concerns, questions, ideas, thoughts, and any requests for professional development that you might have. In this episode, I spoke with Perpetual Baffour, who is the Research Director at the Learning Agency Lab. Perpetual has a degree in philosophy, politics, and economics, and also a master's degree in computer and information technology, so her expertise was really interesting to learn from. We talked about pitfalls and challenges and the ways in which AI and things like ChatGPT can be useful tools for teachers and students in the learning process, and some of the pitfalls and challenges and big questions to consider. AI in education is obviously a topic of increased interest, and I enjoyed this conversation and learned a lot, and hope you find it helpful. I am here with Perpetual Baffour, who is the Research Director of the Learning Agency Lab, and Perpetual is going to tell us a little bit more about herself so that folks know who they are listening to. We're going to talk about AI and learning and perhaps some other things, but Perpetual, welcome, and why don't you introduce yourself?
Thank you so much for having me. My name is Perpetual. I am a research director at the Learning Agency Lab. At a high level, we are a nonprofit that is really devoted to improving educational outcomes by leveraging the science of learning and by leveraging the latest advancements in AI and in data science. So a huge part of our work revolves around launching these open data science competitions. We host competitions online where we release different educational data sets. They can be data sets on student writing or data sets on course material, and we'll have some sort of competition on major platforms like Kaggle, a major data science platform, where different teams will compete to build the best AI algorithm for solving a particular task. As an example, we've had this project called the Feedback Prize, which focused on improving algorithms that could be used for assisted writing feedback tools. So think of an algorithm that can read through a student persuasive essay, break down that essay into different chunks, be able to understand how each segment contributes to the student's argument by labeling it as a position or a claim or a piece of supporting evidence, and then can evaluate the quality of those different argumentative components. So these are the kinds of algorithms we're interested in building and seeing the education community use more of in actual tools and platforms. So we are very excited about the newest advancements in AI. We are excited to see it being leveraged for educational applications, and my role is to help move a lot of that work forward through data science competitions and open data sets.
Okay, well, all very interesting. What was your path to becoming research director? What was your training and any sort of work that you've done sort of leading up to this?
Yeah, it's interesting you ask that because I consider myself to have more of an unconventional path to data science, but in a weird way, all of my prior experiences have kind of fused quite nicely in my current role. So when I graduated from college, I actually had no experience in data science or computing or coding. I was actually working in education policy research.
Hmm.
So I've always had a soft spot in my heart for educational impact and education reform. But I initially was starting out my career doing research on different educational policy issues, advocating for certain reforms. And in my research role, I started to learn about coding through some statistical analyses I had to perform as a part of my research job. And that's when I realized, I actually really like this coding thing. Let me see if I can do a little bit more of this. And that's when I started to learn more about programming, about data, about statistics. And long story short, I ended up pursuing a master's in computer information and technology to really learn more about computer science fundamentals, machine learning, and AI. Now, in my current role, I'm able to sort of marry my love for educational impact with my love for data and coding and AI because I'm able to see how the latter can improve the former. And so now I'm able to take what I've learned in terms of understanding the educational landscape, different educational programs, practices, and policies, and then kind of integrate that into what I do now and thinking about how do we improve these online learning environments? How do we improve these digital platforms that more and more students and teachers are using? And how do we help improve educational outcomes in this new age of big data and AI?
And I'm looking at your bio here on the website, which is the learning agency lab.com. And
Yep.
it says you received an undergrad, I think you referred to it, undergrad in philosophy, politics, and economics from, as I guess they say, UPenn, right? University of Pennsylvania. And those three things are fascinating to me. And I'm sure as you think about education and educational sort of policy and the implications, especially lots of philosophy to be considering in AI and education and outside of education. So it's certainly interesting. So maybe one place to start is because I think people probably think of AI in a number of different ways, and certainly in education, I think probably with the sort of advent of ChatGPT being the big name, but there are others out there and there's other ways to think about AI. How do you define AI, especially in the context of education, if it's different?
Yeah, that's a really great question. I think there are many different definitions and angles to perceive AI. I think one basic one that I like to use is with artificial intelligence, we're really trying to train computers to think the way that a human thinks. If we look at natural language processing, which is a subfield in artificial intelligence, we're trying to train computers to generate and understand human language the way that a human intelligently would, right? And that's the big power, promise, and potential with ChatGPT, its generative abilities. And when I think of artificial intelligence, it's evolved over time. And so how we define intelligence, I think, is actually kind of dynamic because in the past, we considered a calculator, right, as an AI technology, because at the time
Mm-hmm.
it wasn't conceived that you could program a machine to automatically perform these computations, right? Now we're in an age of society where calculators seem a bit outdated, but we have these new machine learning algorithms that can do these tasks in an automatic fashion, and they're doing things that we previously considered only a human intelligently would. So I think the bar or the standard of what computer machines can do intelligently evolves over time. But at a high level, I think relative to whatever period of society in, we're thinking about how do we innovate and progress computer machines so they're able to perform tasks the way that humans naturally would.
Hmm. Right. And there's lots of sort of hand wringing in terms of how this is going to affect and how it is affecting teaching and learning and education in general. But, as you mentioned, like calculators, and there are other examples of sort of transformative technology, right? Things that people will have said over the years that this is going to massively transform education, and it's going to have such an impact, sometimes very positive, sometimes very negative, sometimes maybe both. And in some ways, those things have been true. There's a podcast I did with, her name's Audrey Waters, and she wrote a book about B.F. Skinner and learning machines. And so way, way back, right? The idea and promise that these sort of using conditioning principles of psychology was going to just change teaching and learning in unpredictable and massive ways. And of course, that didn't pan out. And technology like calculators, of course, those were banned in tests, the programming calculators and kinds of things. So how do you sort of read the room on the hand-wringing on AI and education and ChatGPT or any other, again, pieces of AI that are educators right to be very concerned and alarmed, or how do you read that room?
Yeah, that's a great question. I do think educators have a right to be concerned, but I don't think they need to be alarmed. Right? Education has been evolving with technology for decades now. I mentioned the example of the calculators, but even before ChatGPT, we've been seeing this increase in the sort of digitization. Sorry, I don't know if I can say that 5 times fast, of the learning experience. So more and more students are taking classes online. More and more computers are being used in the classroom. With COVID, we saw an explosion in remote and hybrid learning environments. And so even before ChatGPT, there has always been a movement towards making the classroom or making the learning experience more driven by digital technology and by data. I think ChatGPT is unique and especially disruptive because what it's able to do, no one truly had anticipated unless you're deep in the AI field and the AI research community. But now that ChatGPT has entered the mainstream fold, I think people probably aren't aware or weren't aware of what large language models are, right? What is the technology and the algorithms powering chatbots like ChatGPT? And I think because of that lack of information and because of that lack of awareness, naturally, humans were going to be resistant to change if we don't fully understand it. So I think that with more education, with more training, with more information on what ChatGPT can do, what ChatGPT can't do, by promoting it as a tool rather than as a replacement, by showing how it can help teachers do their job more effectively and not make them feel inferior in their ability, we'll see more educators buy into using the tool.
Yeah, there's that fear, and I think, rightfully so in some senses, because there are some big names with lots of money, Bill Gates being one, who has over the years, advocated for some versions of, technologies is replacing teachers. And to me, that doesn't seem anywhere near or in the very near future, unless, of course, we're limiting education to a very narrow scope of what we want students to do and think and learn about, sort of surface knowledge versus deep and transfer kinds of knowledge. It's not quite that simple. But when you think about using AI, and again, ChatGPT being one of many ways, in the classroom and in schools, like, what do you advocate for and want teachers and educators, maybe even teacher preparation programs, to think of? Like, what are the big questions that maybe should guide their work and how they will use it to an advantage and not feel, it's a disadvantage?
Yeah, I think one guiding principle to remember is that ChatGPT is in its new sort of infancy stage. So it's not perfect. And so you can't really run with the first thing that ChatGPT outputs in the interface. So I think it's really important to place emphasis on, in order to get quality responses from ChatGPT, as a user, you have to provide quality input, right? And so let's say there's a teacher who wants to use ChatGPT to generate lesson plans. If you aren't careful, you might not get the most optimal, accurate, or effective response from the ChatGPT interface if you aren't aware of the type of ways in which you have to craft effective prompts. It's actually a field called prompt engineering, looking into how do we design prompts in order to get the desired response from a large language model like ChatGPT. As a more concrete example, let's say you wanted a lesson plan on the planet Mars, and you just entered into the interface, draft me a lesson plan on the planet Mars. Without enough specificity, background, and context information, ChatGPT can run in many different directions and can run in many different generated outputs that might not actually meet your needs. But if you offer it more context, like you are a third grade science teacher tasked with creating a 60-minute lesson plan on the planet Mars, make sure this lesson plan includes some hands-on activities. When you provide context and background information, you get more of that desired output and you're less prone to error from ChatGPT. So at a high level, I think it's important for us to train teachers on some of these simple prompt engineering techniques so they feel more comfortable and confident using ChatGPT. Again, reiterating, you almost have to play the role of being ChatGPT's manager. So as a manager, if you receive a certain deliverable, you still have to review it, you have to evaluate it, you have to fact check it, but you're trusting that this outcome, this product can help you in achieving whatever task you need to complete. So it's an assistant. It's an assistant, but you still, as a teacher, have to apply your domain expertise and your subject matter knowledge in order to complete the task at hand.
Yeah, it really does strike me, and I'm curious how you think about this, or if this resonates. You know, a lot of the all of our professional development work that we do, we talk about it being through the lens of inquiry, and thinking about how teachers can develop a skill set that we might be a facilitator, and using the inquiry process, which isn't necessarily always asking questions, but it's providing and presenting phenomena, prompts, maybe questions, all kinds of things that will sort of spur the sort of thinking that we want in and from our students. And it strikes me similarly, right, with ChatGPT. It's like you have to give it the right sort of parameters and inputs, as you mentioned, to be able to get something that you're wanting to get what you want. And so I'm curious how you see the role of inquiry in this process of teachers engaging with AI and ChatGPT or anything like it.
Yeah, that's another really great question. Maybe before I offer a response, I'm also curious to learn a little bit more about this inquiry process and the framework. Are there specific steps and principles within the lens of inquiry?
Well, there definitely can be, and there's certainly exercises and activities that we engage teachers in, like a question formulation technique, where there's what we call a question focus that might be an image, could be a statement, something that sort of prompts that thinking, and then they generate questions from there. There are others, and so the steps themselves might be sort of different in different exercises and activities, Socratic kind of style seminars and that kind of thing. But one of the things that I talk about, and we talk about we do a lot of project-based learning work and inquiry, is the idea of shifting away from what I would call a push model of teaching, where it's like, I'm the teacher, I'm going to get what's in my head out to the students and then maybe assess it. And, there are gradations of that are maybe more traditional and more didactic and less, as you sort of go along a spectrum. But we want to also definitely include and build on and grow this idea of pull teaching, where how do I get what's in the students' heads out so that I can either build on it, reinforce it, or maybe correct it. And, certainly you can just ask closed-ended questions or do, more, formal kinds of assessments. But there's also just sort of this process and this sort of mindset that facilitators sort of have a variety of responses that are similar in nature to something like, what makes you say that, right? And so that sort of dynamic of, what makes you say that? Again, it might be in a variety of forms. It's not always those exact words, but that's sort of pulling that thinking out, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that's very, very helpful, and fascinating to hear about. I think when you mentioned that, one idea that came to mind is this idea of chain of thought prompting. Essentially, at a high level, what that tries to do as a technique is it tries to get a large language model like ChatGPT to not only offer an answer, but explain its reasoning by breaking things down into steps. So usually when we want to interact with chatbots like ChatGPT, they're conversational. So similarly to like not running with the first thing that ChatGPT outputs, you can probe it some more on its answers that it gives. You can even explicitly say, well, what makes you say that? Can you break this down? Or you can offer ChatGPT maybe your own drafted lesson plan and say, here's what I'm thinking. Does it align with these certain academic and content standards I have to align with as a teacher in Minnesota, for example? And can you break this down step by step where I'm meeting these standards and where you see gaps? And so chain of thought prompting is this new area of prompt engineering where we're trying to get the most desired response from large language models like ChatGPT by explicitly asking it to explain its reasoning and break, its problem solving down into steps. And so that was one idea that came to mind as you mentioned inquiry. And I think that for the process of interacting with chatbots like ChatGPT, you can follow a similar approach in terms of, now, ChatGPT is not perfect in its reasoning ability yet, but I think engaging with it in that manner, prompting it to break things down, to be a little bit more critical, to be a little bit more thoughtful and reflective on its own answers will allow you to elicit more desired outputs from it.
Yeah, well, it sounds like there's, in those steps that you're defining or describing, and I would say there's a parallel to that sort of inquiry teaching model in as so much as there's a sort of predictive nature, right? Like you're trying to maybe predict what the responses might be, which means you sort of have to understand the way that ChatGPT is working. And in students, like how do brains work? Like what do they know? What don't they know? What are the sort of algorithms that they're using? Because, I think you would agree, like people actually use sort of algorithms, right, of heuristics and that kind of thing. So is there like a pretty heavy emphasis on being able to sort of accurately predict like outcomes?
I think there's a lot of research being done right now to really understand what's going on underneath the hood of ChatGPT. There are some areas that are interpretable, and there are some areas that are still very much a black box. And I think that the more we're able to really, as you mentioned, predict the type of responses ChatGPT generates, the more control we'll have into making sure ChatGPT doesn't produce content that's harmful, biased, or inaccurate. And so I think to some extent, there is this sense of anticipation. There are some areas where we can kind of see how ChatGPT might respond to a particular prompt. But I think that is still very much an area that research needs to be done more on.
So I asked you to define AI, and you did a great job. But one of the things that I would guess many people don't understand, and I don't think I fully understand it, it'd be helpful for me. When you say large language learning model, right? Like what does that mean? And as a sort of tangential question, I've seen responses from ChatGPT that are like, well, I'm not connected to the internet, or there's limited connections to the internet. So I'm like, I don't understand exactly what that means. So what does that mean to be a large language model?
Yes, that is an excellent question. And I'll try my best to offer a helpful response here. So at a high level, a large language model is a computer machine algorithm that's learned how to generate, read, and analyze human language in a human-like fashion. So these models have been trained on a massive amount of textual data that's been scraped from various sources like websites, textbooks, articles, even real human conversations. And all of that data was used to train these models. And they were able to take these algorithms and techniques to basically identify patterns in the text. So if you can imagine a computer machine that has this digital library of text, and it's learned how to process this data almost similar to how a human brain works, with these networks of different layers that can process all this information. So now the computer machine can identify patterns in human language on its own, and it's detecting patterns in the meaning of words, in the meaning of sentences, in the connections between paragraphs, and the connections between different concepts and ideas. So these large language models have learned from all this data. GPT specifically, which is the base underlying large language model that powers ChatGPT, is a specific type of large language model that's called a generative language model. And with generative language models, they not only have understood the patterns in human language, now they can generate human language and have a conversation with you in a human-like manner. And that's what makes ChatGPT so powerful. It's because they've learned from all this data, the digital library of text, they've learned how to understand the meanings and context of words.
Fascinating. So I've played around with it a little bit, but I don't use ChatGPT or any of the similar models a lot, and perhaps I should, and very likely I should. I'm curious how often you use it and how you use it in your work, but maybe more specifically, and we can shift gears into how we should advocate for schools and teachers using it. And I know you've got some thinking around that and how it could really have, be really beneficial.
Yes, I use ChatGPT a lot in my work and in my personal life. I think when it comes to my work, I see it as a productivity tool. So similarly as to how you might use Google Docs or Google Sheets or Gmail or these other sort of apps and tools to help make your work more efficient in completing tasks, I use ChatGPT similarly. And the way I try to break it down is I break it down into 3 different categories or types of productivity. There's one, which is just creating. So maybe you need to craft an email. ChatGPT can help you craft emails. You can provide clear instructions on the tone of the email, the length of the email, important points to put in the email. That's a type of creation. ChatGPT can create text in a wide variety of formats. Emails is just one simple example. Then there's the category of analyzing. So in my work, oftentimes I have to learn a lot of different concepts in data science, in AI, machine learning, and educational technology. ChatGPT, because it has this digital library of information and learns how to understand human language, it can break down really complex concepts into easy, plain to understand English. And so it's very common for me if I'm reading, let's say, an academic journal article, I might plug it into ChatGPT and say, hey, can you translate this so that I can understand? Or can you translate this so a 3rd grader could understand? Can you rewrite this research article in plain English? So I use it often when it comes to helping to further my understanding in different topics or to analyze different documents that I need some assistance on. And then the 3rd category of productivity is brainstorming. So maybe I don't need a specific product like an email or a memo. Maybe I'm not trying to analyze a pre-existing document like a paper or a book, but I just want a brainstorming session. I need to generate ideas for a potential convening on math misconceptions. I need to brainstorm some ideas about how to improve my skills in people management. ChatGPT can work as a sounding board or as a brainstorming partner. Hey, ChatGPT, I'd love to improve my people management skills, particularly as it relates to sort of interpersonal connection. What are some ideas to improve my skills in this area? Or, hey, ChatGPT, I need to plan a convening or a symposium for different education AI leaders on how to use the latest advancements in chain of thought prompting. What are some ideas on how I can structure that event? And ChatGPT can offer some valuable ideas in that regard as well. So I think those three categories, creating with ChatGPT, analyzing with ChatGPT, brainstorming with ChatGPT, can improve. It has improved my productivity, and I think it can improve teachers' productivity as well.
Well, one thing that I've really sort of struggled with in I suppose in sort of the creating and analysis parts, I haven't even thought to use it as brainstorming. And I've tried a little bit of the creation piece, but maybe even more so with the analysis piece. One thing I wonder is there's sort of like, as you mentioned, like it's not perfect, right? You sort of might be best to proceed with sort of like trust but verify kind of mindset, right? But one thing, if we're asking it to analyze something, let's say, or even create something based on an analysis, there's a process that as humans we go through in creating that and learning it and thinking more deeply about it, that it feels like there's at least the opportunity for us to sort of skip over that, if that makes sense, as we ask AI to analyze something, and then we sort of look at the output, the analysis of it, and so our starting point as in our understanding curve, and I'm sort of thinking out loud here, so this may not make 100% complete sense, but like there's almost like a risk of sort of confirmation bias or something like that, like because we haven't started from zero and worked our way through it to develop a really deep understanding, that entering into it with some of those underlying assumptions that ChatGPT must have used to get there, that we almost like, it's like we have to onboard those as assumptions for ourselves, right? And that to me feels a little bit, I don't know, it's not scary, it's just, it leaves me wondering about how to navigate that. I don't know. Does any of that make sense? And please ask clarifying questions if I was obscure.
And am I hearing sort of some of the concern, which is valid and legitimate concern around if we use ChatGPT to help create or analyze, we lose out on the experience of being able to engage in these sort of higher order cognitive functions. Like that process gets missed because we're jumping straight to the output that ChatGPT generates.
Yeah.
Is that what I'm?
Well, so like, let me give you an example in teaching, right? So one thing that is certainly true about teaching is that the better you know the content, the more fluent you are with the content, the better you are at some of that facilitative, what makes you say that kind of questioning and being able to teach it. And so one can you get better every time you teach it, and the more you sort of think through it, right? The more neural connections and things that you connect it to and you work with it. And I can imagine even saying, make a lesson plan for this, and then having to, say, all right, I'm going to do this lesson plan, but not have, you sort of missed out on the opportunity, I guess, in a sense, to make those deeper connections that you just have to do to work with it. Does that make sense?
Yes, I think that's a really great point. And I think that's where the responsibility, I do believe, falls on the user. It kind of reminds me of some of the concerns people have with plagiarism in ChatGPT that, if a student is given a writing assignment, rather than engage through all stages of the writing process and brainstorming and outlining and drafting and revision, it'll just plug the prompt into ChatGPT and run with the first essay that ChatGPT outputs.
Right.
And even though those are concerns and risks, I think we have seen in other fields and other areas that the presence of AI being able to do all of those tasks for you doesn't necessarily mean that people will stop developing in key skills. One area is in chess. So now there have been so much improvements in AI machines being able to win at chess games. And what they found was, even though there was a concern of like, computers can play chess games now, so what's the motivation? People aren't going to want to play chess anymore. The chess game has actually become even more popular online. And chess players are using these AI machines to better understand skills and strategies for winning at chess. So even though they're aware of the fact that this computer machine can win at chess, because they have that innate desire to develop as a chess player, they have that natural passion to hone their craft. They're using AI as an assistant to develop in this area rather than to develop a mindset that AI can solve this, so I no longer have any area to improve as a chess player. I think teachers can put on that similar mindset as well, that if, they're passionate about improving their instructional practice, they want to develop effective teaching strategies or classroom management strategies. And so there is going to need to be some intrinsic motivation to still want to develop in certain skills as it relates to lesson planning. There is going to need to be some intrinsic motivation to engage with ChatGPT as a peer, as an assistant, as a tool, rather than as a gateway or a cheat card. Will some still fall prone to the habit of just running with ChatGPT and really engaging with their own cognitive thoughts and processes? For sure. But I think the best teachers will be the ones who know how to use ChatGPT as a tool rather than as sort of a bypass for their own instructional improvement.
Well, it reminds me a little bit of the problem of, like just going on and buying teachers pay teachers kinds of things and, plug and play kinds of activities. And, I think it's essentially the same thing. And that's not good practice, and nor would it be just to type in, make my lesson plan for today and plug and play, that kind of thing. So in speaking about the benefits, are there particular sort of audiences or groups or age groups or subject areas that you think AI is better? There's more, I guess, potential, more value. I know that you have some of your work is meant to sort of, how do you use AI to personalize for sort of disadvantaged and underserved students, and maybe that's one of those areas.
Yes, and I can quickly speak on using ChatGPT for personalized instruction, and then later on dial back to age groups or grade levels that I believe ChatGPT is currently best suited for. So I think personalized instruction is a really great promising application of ChatGPT, because let's say there's a student who's really interested in baseball. A teacher can work with ChatGPT to generate different writing exercises or prompts that revolve around the subject of baseball, therefore personalizing writing instruction for the specific interests of that student. And as I'm sure you may know, teachers may not have time to personalize learning material for each student's interests and preferences and needs in that classroom. ChatGPT can make that process a lot more efficient and a lot more automatic. And so I definitely believe that personalized instruction is a great way to leverage ChatGPT to improve instruction in the classroom. In terms of grade levels, when it comes to ChatGPT's ability to understand math, there's mixed evidence as to what ChatGPT can do. So I think when it comes to elementary school math and middle school math, there's probably greater safety in using ChatGPT when it comes to math instruction for those grade levels. But when it comes to high school, college, more advanced math concepts in calculus and statistics, there is greater risk. There have been some articles to show that the latest wave of GPT-4, can solve really hard math problems. And there's also some papers and studies out showing that, ChatGPT might actually be getting worse in how it's solving math problems. So I think math is probably the riskier subject area compared to writing in English, which kind of makes intuitive sense if we go back to how these models are trained, right? They're trained on text. And so it's easier for ChatGPT to understand human language when it's words rather than when it's words mixed with numbers. And so I think that when it comes to math, where there's a lot of formulas, there's a lot of computation, there's a lot of abstraction and reasoning, ChatGPT is still very impressive. I'm very impressed with the types of math problems ChatGPT can solve, but I think the higher you go in difficulty level, the greater the risk grows in terms of ChatGPT outputting something that is inaccurate.
Interesting. Well, I would love to talk more, but as I said before we started recording, unfortunately, I have to go, and there's certainly lots more to talk about, but I want to make sure folks can find where you are and anything that you want to share with them as far as links and things like that.
For sure. And as you mentioned, I work for the Learning Agency Lab. The URL is, as you mentioned, the-learning-agency-lab.com. We also have a sister organization, the Learning Agency LLC, which is the-learning-agency.com. If you'd like to learn more about our work, specifically in data science competitions, we have one data science competition going on right now on Kaggle.com. It's called Common Lit Evaluate Student Summaries. And I think that will give you a really great example of the type of work we're doing. We're essentially trying to help build AI algorithms that can automatically grade student summaries when a student is asked to summarize a reading passage or a portion of a reading passage. You'll also be able to see our previous competitions on the Kaggle site as well.
Interesting. Well, English teachers are eagerly awaiting that, I'm sure, not having to read essay after essay after essay, perhaps. Well, Perpetual, it's been a pleasure talking, and we'll put those links in the show notes. And again, certainly an interesting and important and ever growing in importance sort of topic. So thank you so much.
All right, thank you.
Thanks again so much for listening. I really do appreciate it. If you found this conversation to be useful, thought-provoking, or something that's worth commenting on and sharing, please do so with your friends, your social networks, and leave reviews where you listen to your podcasts. It's really helpful for our podcast and hopefully for anybody that you might share with. And of course, please visit us at wegrowteachers.com if you have questions about our professional development, or email me at drew@teachthought.com.